Hello, everyone, and welcome to ASQAcast, ASQA's official podcast and your avenue to being informed about all things ASQA. It's Rottmann here, and I'm excited to have Melinda Cox join me today to talk about one of the most asked about components of the 2025 standards for RTOs, that is the Credential Policy. Mel is the director for the Policy and Education team, which supports effective regulation by providing strategic policy advice, contributing to legislative reform, and developing education and resources for the sector. In this episode, we'll talk more about what providers need to know about the Credential Policy and some of the common misconceptions. So thanks so much, Mel, for joining me today.
Thanks, Kai. It's great to be here.
All right, so we have been out and about running workshops, doing webinars and attending conferences. So tell me, how has the transition to the 2025 standards gone so far?
Quite well, actually. So the 2025 standards came into full regulatory effect, as everyone knows, on the 1st of July this year. And we've been engaging with the sector all year long, including through the workshops we had and webinars in May and June, publication of our 19 practice guides, and release of FAQs on our website summarising the more than 700 questions we've received from providers since the standards began.
So Mel, with the over 100 frequently asked questions, what have you been hearing about the implementation from providers?
So our pulse surveys are telling us that providers are feeling highly motivated and well prepared to adapt to the outcomes-focused approach under the new standards. But naturally, look, implementation-specific questions are now surfacing, and we've continued to receive a lot of questions around the Credential Policy in particular, and that's why we're hoping to focus on that today.
Great. So the Credential Policy is obviously one part of the 2025 standards, and it specifies the credentials required by the vet workforce. So what has actually changed from the 2015 standards to the 2025 standards?
So there are three components that comprise the 2025 standards for RTOs: the outcome standards, compliance requirements, and credential policy, and all three components are enforceable. In terms of the vet workforce requirements, it's important to remember that both outcome standards 3.2 and 3.3, as well as the credential policy, outline the requirements for those delivering and assessing training and assessment. The credential policy largely reflects previous requirements made as part of the early changes to the 2015 standards about 18 months ago, although there have been a couple of minor amendments, notably enabling individuals who hold the 2010 version of the Certificate 4 in TAE, so TAE 40110, to deliver training and assessment without needing to hold the 2 additional units of competency in addressing adult language, literacy and numeracy skills, and designing and developing assessment tools, and expanding the term diploma or higher level qualification in adult education to diploma or higher level qualification in adult education or vocational education and training.
All right. So let me just check that with you. So a trainer that holds TAE 40110 Cert 4 in training and assessment is no longer required to also hold the TAE LLN 411 and the TAE ASS 502?
Yeah, that's right, Kai. So individuals that hold that 2010 version of the Certificate 4 and TAE are now allowed to deliver training and assessment without being mandated to also hold those 2 additional units of competency. That said, it always remains critical that providers ensure their trainers and assessors have the right competency, skills and knowledge relevant to the training products they're delivering. So if those 2 additional competencies are going to be necessary for your particular context, then you would still ensure that your trainers and assessors hold those.
Great. Thanks for that. And Mel, you mentioned outcome standards 3.2 and 3.3, and these refer to credentialing and industry currency. So industry currency is still a requirement in 2025?
Yep, it certainly is, Kai. And there actually has been some confusion about this. So the outcome standards, not the credential policy, actually outline the requirement for all persons delivering training and assessment to maintain their understanding of current industry practices relevant to the training product being delivered. So that's why I've said that it's essential that providers read the credential policy alongside the outcome standards and the compliance requirements to ensure that they have the full picture of all of their obligations.
Okay, great. And so Mel, how can providers actually demonstrate industry currency?
Yeah, so industry currency can be demonstrated in various ways and in various combinations. So, for example, the obvious one is time spent working or even volunteering in the relevant industry, undertaking industry accredited training, belonging to an industry association, attending networking events, or even subscribing to industry journals. How often or how recently these activities need to be undertaken to maintain currency really depends on the particular industry and how often it changes and evolves, and the training product being delivered and assessed.
Okay, that helps. Thank you, Mel. Now, I also understand that we've had a lot of questions about the requirements for those who are working under direction. Can you explain that a bit more?
Yeah, definitely. So, under our 2025 standards, certain people are permitted to deliver training and contribute to assessment, including conducting assessment tasks and collecting assessment evidence, provided they work under the direction of a fully qualified trainer and assessor. So, this includes persons actively working towards their TAE, which is 1C of the Credential Policy, and those who hold any credential listed in Section 1D of the Credential Policy, such as secondary school teachers. The requirements of those providing the direction are listed in Section 1E of the Credential Policy.
Okay, and what are the rules around those who are working under direction? They can conduct and collect assessment evidence, but can they make assessment judgments?
Yeah, no, they definitely can't, Kai. So a person working under direction isn't permitted to make assessment judgments as per standard 3.2. This is a really important distinction to be made. So assessment is not the same as assessment judgment. The legislation actually defines assessment judgment as the determination of whether competency has been achieved by a vet student. And this can only be done by an appropriately credentialed and qualified person. So a person working under direction, which includes an industry expert, or an individual working towards their TAE credential, might, for example, help collect assessment evidence. However, this evidence must then be handed to the fully qualified assessor to make the actual assessment judgment.
Okay, that makes sense. And does a fully qualified trainer and assessor that is providing direction, so for example, to an expert, also need to have industry competence and currency?
Yes, so it's absolutely critical that trainers and assessors and any experts engaged to support those trainers and assessors all have the current industry competencies, skills, and knowledge relevant to the training product. Where experts are involved in training and assessment, the trainer and or assessor they are working under the direction of must be fully qualified and meet the thresholds required by the standards, as well as being responsible for making those assessment judgments.
Okay, thanks for explaining that, Mel. Now, we've also received a lot of questions around the term contributing to assessment, with providers wanting to know what that means in a practical sense. Can you please provide some examples of what it means to contribute to assessment?
Absolutely. Some examples of how a person working under direction might contribute to assessment would be administering assessment conditions, for example, where it's a written assessment. This might include monitoring students, ensuring they're not using any materials which aren't permitted in the room, enforcing time limits on the assessment task. They might collect completed assessments to then provide to the fully qualified assessor. They might observe an assessment being undertaken and take some detailed notes, for example, during a practical role play or verbal assessment. They might record observations of performance. They might gather workplace documents such as logbooks or work samples or employer feedback. They might do some marking, but that's only of objective components under very clear marking guides. So, for example, multiple choice questions, really black and white, only one correct answer, and then provide this information to the fully qualified assessor to help them in making the assessment judgment. And they might support learners in compiling their portfolio of evidence for an RPL process, for example.
Great. So there's a number of examples there. Thank you, Mel. Look, we're nearly there. So now the credential policy also states that the RTO must be able to justify the relevance of the person's credential to the vet student cohort being delivered to. What does this actually mean?
Okay, so to deliver training and conduct assessment under direction, a person must hold one of the relevant credentials as per the Credential Policy, which includes a range of different skill sets, from vet delivered to school students, teacher enhancement skill set, to the enterprise trainer and assessor skill set. So providers need to ensure that the credential held by their trainers and assessors in accordance with this section is relevant to their role, or as relevant as possible to their role, taking into account the nature of the student cohort and delivery context. So for example, if you're a person working under direction, delivering vet to school students, it would be most appropriate to hold the TAE SS 00024 vet delivered to school students teacher enhancement skill set. Whereas if you're a person working under direction in an enterprise RTO environment, it would be more suitable for the person to hold one of the enterprise related skill sets.
Awesome. Definitely a tongue twister there. So with supervision, how much is required for those working under direction?
Yeah, this is a great question. So the level of supervision required actually depends on the skills and experience of the person who's under direction. So as an example, an industry expert may have a consistent level of supervision over time. It may not change ever. But a person who's actively working towards their TAE may have their level of direction gradually decrease over time. Though, while they're still completing their TAE, the level of direction wouldn't ever be zero. That is, until they're a fully qualified trainer and assessor in their own right, they require supervision. They have to be working under direction. So RTOs also need to ensure that those providing that supervision monitor and remain accountable for the training and assessment activities undertaken by the person under their supervision or direction.
Thanks, Mel. So look, we've covered a lot today, and I'm going to get you to talk a little bit more. So before we go, is there anything else that RTO should be aware of in implementing the credential policy?
Look, I suppose I just want to reiterate the importance of understanding the credential policy within the context of those other two component parts of our 2025 standards, so the outcome standards and compliance requirements. It's just a really good habit to get into of cross-referencing and reading all three. I guess I'd also like to really encourage providers to review the other guidance. So, the practice guide, of course, the FAQs, there's quite a few FAQs on the topic of vet workforce or credential policy that are on our website. And the October edition of ASQA IQ also is almost wholly devoted to this topic and includes a little case study. So providers might find that a bit useful too.
Wonderful. Look, thank you again, Mel. It's absolutely brilliant to have you on board for ASQAcast today. I'll definitely find time in your schedule to have you back on. So that wraps it up for another episode on ASQAcast today. Stay tuned for our next episodes as we continue to highlight the 2025 standards. You can find all of our podcasts on our website by heading to asqa.gov.au and searching podcasts. If you have any topics of interest that you would like to hear more about, please send us an email at podcasts@asqa.gov.au. We look forward to you joining us next time on ASQAcast. Bye for now.